July 1976. Many of you that are here today had never been born. Now, just imagine this beautiful green lawn under the sunny British sky, and children playing on that lawn. Now, what could be better than that? I was one of the children playing on that lawn, and the father of the family, where I was spending some weeks to be able to improve my English in some friends of my parents' house, he was the greatest player on the lawn. He organized the games for us, and I think he was more of a child than the rest of us playing on the lawn. And suddenly, one day, he wasn't there anymore. So although I was extremely shy, I managed to draw up enough courage to go and look for him. And I found him inside the house, in a room, sitting in front of the TV. And I went up and I said, "Why aren't you outside playing on the lawn?" And he said, "Because the Olympic Games have started." And I sort of looked at him saying, "What's that?" He saw the look on my face, and so he asked me, "Don't you know what the Olympic Games are?" Obviously not. So he brought me in, he sat me down on the sofa next to him, in front of this TV, which was one of these old box TVs, huge box, tiny screen, not much color. And he started explaining to me, this is the greatest sporting competition celebrated in the whole world. And it's every 4 years. And every 4 years, all the best athletes from all over the world, they come together to participate here. I was incredibly amused about how the athletes would walk in, walk out with their national flags, tracksuits with the colors of their national flags. Then I was even more fascinated by the competition, how they would compete. Some would win and they were so happy. Others would lose and they were absolutely shattered. And then I was really inspired by the medal ceremony. And that inspiration led to a challenge, and over the years became my goal in life. Now that afternoon, I decided what I wanted to do in life. I did not want to be sitting here on the sofa watching the TV. I wanted to be inside the TV. Now let me tell you a little bit more about me. As I said, I was 11, and I love sport. I used to compete in middle distance running, played in a basketball team, did a fairly decent good game of tennis. And every time I went onto the playing field since that day, I would always ask myself, is this the sport that's going to take me to the Olympic Games? And a couple of years later, I started sailing. And I absolutely fell in love with the sport and also with the surrounding where we would practice the sport. Going out into the sea, steering your own boat. You're not allowed to steer a car, but you could steer a boat. And feel that wind in your face, the sea water splashing. It was just an incredible sensation of freedom, of liberty. And I knew from day one that that was going to be the sport that would take me to the Olympic Games. But there were quite a few stones in the road. To start with, women were not invited to go to the Olympic Games in my sport in those years. They could go in athletics, they could go in gymnastics, they could go in swimming, maybe 1 or 2 sports more, but not much. Definitely not in sailing. So I realized that I could not do anything about that. That someday, someone would come along and do something to change that. So I would leave it in their hands. And I decided to focus on what I could do. And I needed to become really good at my sport. And I did. As I've said, times change. Times change, and that someone that was going to do something did it. And when they did, I thought, wow, this has been done just for me. For the first time ever in history, women could go to the Olympic Games in sailing in Seoul 1988. So I needed to have a boat. Now, a few years before, when I started sailing, I also needed to have a boat. And I did not have the money to buy a boat. My family did not have the money to buy a boat. So I started fundraising. I was only 14 or 15 at the time. But I got enough money to buy a second-hand cheap boat and start competing in that. And then I started improving. And with that improvement, I also needed to go to regattas abroad. And there was no budget line for the girls to go abroad. We were not in the program of the Olympic Games, so we did not have a budget line. So again, I fundraised and I managed to go to regattas abroad. Just imagine, the top 3 boys would go paid by the Spanish National Federation. The top girl, which was me, I went paid by myself. They would sleep in an apartment. I would sleep in a tent. It was cheaper. That was what I could afford. They would go to a restaurant and have dinner. In the first regatta I went to in Holland, I spent the whole week eating potato chips with ketchup and mayonnaise. I discovered in Holland that you can also put mayonnaise on potato chips, not only ketchup. It was quite a discovery. So when finally a sailing event is included in the Olympic Games, I needed to fundraise again. I needed a bigger boat, a 2-person boat. I needed someone to go with me. I came to live here in Barcelona, which is where the national team was. And I decided that I had to put every effort into this so that in less than 4 years, I could be amongst the top in the world. And I did. Now, to go to the Olympic Games, only one boat can go per country if the country's good enough, because not 200 countries can go and participate in each event. So in sailing, we were good enough. We got the slot for our country, for Spain, and then it's up to Spain to decide who is going to use that slot. And you have some trials. In the trials, well, I was nearly always in the top 10, and there was no other women Spanish sailor that was hardly ever in the top 10. So it was pretty obvious that we won the trials, and we had to go to the games. Now, what they do is they summon you into a room with all the rest of the people that have participated in the trials. There was quite a few of us, because it was 1 women's event, but 7 men's events. And then, after saying, thank you for all your effort and blah, 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 they come to the point, and they read out the list of who will be representing Spain. And when they get to women's 470 double-handed dinghy, and they read out the name, my name was not on the list. Now, can you imagine how I felt that day? I'd done everything to go to the Olympic Games. Since I was 11, I'd been working towards that every day of my life. And suddenly, for some reason that I didn't understand, I was not there. I was absolutely shattered. I didn't understand what was going on. I felt extremely sorry for myself, and I decided that I didn't want to sail anymore. And I gave up. Now, lots of times when you're in the center of the picture, the vision you have of that picture is very different than when you look at it from a distance. And as I started doing different things, I started looking at the picture of my life from a distance. And I realized that I'd been so focused on the goal that although the journey towards that goal was an incredible privilege, I'd never really given it any thought. And I decided that I needed to go back. Now, to go back, the first thing I had to do was eat my pride, and I did. And then I went back saying, right, I'm going to focus on my goal, but I'm going to really enjoy the journey. I'm going to be a lot stronger than I was, not only on the race course, but also mentally. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to be the best, and I'm going to shatter all the statistics. And I did. So when the time comes for the 1992 Olympic Games, again, we were summoned inside a room, thank you very much, blah, 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 and the list comes along. Now, at that moment, we were national champions, European champions, world champions, and #1 of the world ranking. So I don't think there was much doubt as to whose name was going to be on that list. But I must admit that when they came up and said, right, 470 women's double-handed dinghy, before they said my name, my heart absolutely stopped beating. So we made it. Barcelona 92, just down the road. Something we'd been preparing for, in my case, for my whole life, practically. And we were the clear favourites. The favourites to win the gold medal. And we knew the statistics. In the history of the sport of sailing, which was practically 100 years, no one had won a medal of any colour in the Olympic Games with a very bad performance in the first race. So we didn't have to risk, and our strategy was, right, first day, no risk, second day, we'll see. And they gun for the start, and suddenly the committee gives another gun saying, right, there's been a premature starter. Somebody has jumped the gun. Somebody was over the line before the gun. And it's up to you to decide if it's you or not. If it's you, you can go around and restart. We knew it wasn't us. We did a fairly bad start because we didn't want to risk. So we start sailing. And when we get close to the first mark, there's a boat there of the organization with a white board, and we couldn't see what was on it. There was 3 letters. But as we were getting closer and closer, suddenly we saw 3 letters on it. E-S-P. España. We had to look at it several times. We did not believe what we were seeing at that moment. And so we were forced to abandon the race course. When we get into the harbour, our team leader was there, and he said, look, calm down, this is a mistake. It's not ESP over the line, it's EST, Estonia. We have a video from a helicopter of Spanish television, it's really clear, so we're going to seek redress. So we went to seek redress, we went in front of the jury. It took us about 4 hours to explain everything. We showed them the video. They saw it and they admitted this had been a really big mistake. And then when it seems that everything was okay, we were going to be given redress, suddenly one of the members of the jury decides to say that this video is not an official proof, they do not have to admit it, and everything just fell apart. So something that we'd been preparing for our whole lives, the first day of competition we were last. And that night when we went to bed, Patricia and I, we looked at each other and we said, look, tomorrow is another day. Let's enjoy it and let's do a good race and not think about anything else. And we did. The next day comes along and we did the same philosophy. We're going to do a good race. And we did. And we did this day after day. And in the last race but one, we still did a good race, but we really did a masterly race in the sense that we managed to put enough boats between us, the Japanese, the Australian, and the New Zealanders to be able to compensate on those points they were still ahead of us and go up to the first place. So to cut the story short, we won the gold medal in Barcelona 92. 4 years later, I went back with another crew and won again in Atlanta 1996. Now, if you asked me, what did you learn during all this time? I would say, if you want to do something that you've never done, you need to do something that you never did. And I can assure you that that something is outside of your comfort zone. I needed to buy a boat and I had no money, and I did it. I needed to become a good sailor, and I did. I needed to eat my pride to go back into sailing, and I did. So if I could go back now and speak to that 11-year-old girl that was playing games on the lawn, what I would say to her is, don't be afraid of going out of your comfort zone. That is where life begins. So go there and enjoy the journey. Thank you very much.